Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to do a recommendation video of horror books to read if you like Stephen King. And just to be clear, this is books to read by other authors besides Stephen King, because it'd be a pretty lazy video if I just went on here and just listed off a whole bunch of his titles. So this is hopefully meant to be a video for those of you that already love Stephen King and are looking for other authors that have a similar feel to their writing, and especially for those of you that are looking to branch out. I know for a lot of people, when I say, oh, I read horror, they say, yes, I like Stephen King too. And I always have to point out that there's other authors who are also writing in horror doing fantastic things. And I know for a lot of people, especially if they only dabble in the genre, they just tend to pick up one Stephen King book every Halloween. So for those of you watching this, I do read a lot of books by other horror authors, and hopefully I can give you some jumping off points just to expand your horizons. And yeah, I think I have a great list of books to talk about, so let's get started. First, I'm going to start with the obligatory gimme picks, and for those of you that love Stephen King, you're probably already familiar with the fact that his son, Joe Hill, also writes books, but just in case, I want to recommend my favorite by him, and that of course is Nosferatu. This follows a young girl with some possible supernatural abilities to find things that have gone missing, and she gets roped up with a terrible villain named Charlie Manx who takes away children in his Rolls-Royce car to Christmasland. And this is one I want to recommend because as his son, he does seem to have a similar writing style, a similar idea of storytelling, and he definitely takes some nods and winks in his story back to his father's work, which I think those of you that really are familiar with the multiverse and all of his backlist are really going to appreciate those references. But beyond that, I do think Nosferatu, of all of Joe Hill's work, is the most similar to Stephen King's, and I think particularly similar in the way that it tells an epic horror story. So we follow multiple perspectives, and we really get to see a younger child with supernatural ability, again referencing a lot of Stephen King stories as well. And the villain, the car, could be a reference to Christine and things like that. And within the story itself is fantastic, but it definitely gave me Stephen King vibes. I've reread Nosferatu many times, and since reading more of Stephen King's work, I notice more and more similarities. So I really recommend starting there if for some reason you have not. Also, if you want to read more by his son, I would recommend Horns, and this follows a young man who at the beginning of the story wakes up to find that he is possibly growing horns out of his head. In this town, he is looked down upon and is believed to be the murderer of his girlfriend. He has never been proven to be guilty of that crime, but everyone just believes that he did it. And we follow him as he's trying to go about his day and find out what to do with these horns. And you find out that along with growing horns, he now seems to have this supernatural ability to hear people's thoughts, but not just any thoughts, but their guilty pleasures, their dark secrets, the unspeakable things that we all think but we don't actually say. This book is very uncomfortable, very vulgar, and I do think that it definitely again has nods to Stephen King's work, not quite as similar, but again I do think if you like the father's work, chances are you will like the son's as well. This one definitely has some really good dark humor to it. It's a little bit fantastical and is very much focused around the characters, a lot of themes around religion and different commentary on guilt and sin and a lot of those really topical issues. So I do think that this one would be a really fun one to read again if you have not already done so. Now, moving outside the family bubble, I want to recommend Chasing the Boogeyman by Richard Chizmar. And this is perhaps more of a thriller than horror, but I know a lot of people will acknowledge, like myself, that Stephen King actually writes a lot of things that aren't technically horror. So this one is one of the most meta thrillers I've ever read because it is written from the author Richard Chizmar, who puts himself into the story, and the story is almost written as if it was a true life memoir. And the author goes out of his way to include as many details of his personal life, some of which are true, within the story. So the first time reading through, you have no idea what is true and what is fiction. And then the end of the story, he gives you some insight into that, but I definitely recommend to go into this one as blind as possible. And so within the story, we follow him as supposedly a young boy who, growing up, there was a serial killer on the loose who was taking down these young women. And then it follows them throughout the years as he grows and ages. So it is a coming of age story. and then as he gets older, eventually coming to terms with what actually happened and who that serial killer was, as it eventually is revealed. Now, I want to recommend this one for a few reasons to Stephen King fans. First being that coming of age element, and I've read so many different coming of age stories, but this one is definitely in the Stephen King vein. And for those of you that aren't aware, Richard Chizmar is a friend of Stephen King. They have co-written books together, and you can definitely tell that he has a lot of respect for his co-author, because within this story, because of course it's set back in time, he talks about reading Stephen King books, about different horror references, things like that, and it's interwoven within the story. So I think anyone who, again, already loves Stephen King, this book to me read like a love letter to his older work. And so I love those aspects to it. And then beyond that, it's just simply a really good story. You have this mystery, this serial killer. And again, I think that that will appeal to those of you that enjoy more of Stephen King's crime work, which is more of his newer work. And so it blends together the old Stephen King with the new Stephen King, nods and references back that are going to give you those nostalgic feels. And it's just wrapped up in a really unique, interesting narrative that is so compelling. I could not put this book down. Highly recommend it. The audio is great, but then you also want the physical book so that you can see all the pictures and little evidence throughout the way. And yeah, I love this book a lot. Definitely one you want to read if you love Stephen King. Next up, I want to talk about The Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig. And this is another piece of epic horror that follows a family that moved to a town where the father's own father used to live. And so they inherit his house and move in there in order to get a fresh start. You find out early on that the son got in some trouble, and so they are trying to get away from that, and soon enough you realize that he might also have some supernatural abilities. The story is told from multiple perspectives of the different family members, and throughout the story you learn that the father has a very difficult relationship with his own father because he was very abusive growing up. And so the story deals a lot with generational abuse. On top of that, there's also this serial killer on the loose, and then we have the younger boy who makes friends with someone in the community. And the story, or title of it, Book of Accidents, starts to make sense as the story moves along. This is one I definitely want to recommend to those of you, again, that love Stephen King's epic horror, where you know that there is a lot of stake behind what is happening. There is a lot that is being built towards in the ending with a fantastic climax. And I just think that this one, again, is long and just a story to get lost in, with multiple characters, really interesting characters. And the author, Chuck Wendig, just like Stephen King, does a lot of character work, so you really get to know the characters as you're going through the story. So I think if you love those elements of his work, you will be really pleased with this one. This, again, is another favorite of mine, and one that I think is worth reading and rereading again. And again, it's a longer one, but I do think that it is just worth your time, and just about every page needed to be in there. Next up, I want to recommend Tattered Demon by Steve Vernon. And this follows a young woman who, at the beginning of the story, hits her husband with a frying pan and ends up killing him. And in so doing so, she needs to get rid of his body. She takes him to a field and buries him there. Little does she know that a witch was buried in the same field many, many years ago. And of course, by doing so, she has possibly unleashed some sort of demon on the community and has to deal with it. This is one that I'll be honest, it's more the tone of the story, less so the plot, that really makes me want to recommend it for fans of Stephen King. I will say that this book is very dark, very disturbing, deals with some difficult subject matter. The author does not hold back, and I certainly enjoyed those aspects to it. So for those of you that can definitely tolerate and give a blind eye to some of the more strange things that Stephen King has done in his books, I'm thinking about the ending of It, if you're familiar with that. And if you're willing to read a really good story despite those moments that are going to make you really uncomfortable, this might be a really good one to check out. The author is Canadian, as of myself, and I've described this author before as Canadians' answer to Stephen King. So again, I think if you're looking for just that similar tone, that similar something that is so hard to describe, but you kind of know it when you read it, I really think you'll get similar feels from reading Tattered Demon. So I definitely want more people to check it out. In my opinion, it's a little bit more underhyped, and I do think a lot of people who love Stephen King are also really going to enjoy this one. I did think it was a lot of fun. From there, I want to talk about Boy's Life by Robert McCammon, which I think most people are aware of and have probably heard the the comparisons before, but this is a story of a boy who is going off with his father on a milk run. When they see something terrible, they see a car drowning in the water, and within there is a murdered person. And so the story follows them for roughly the course of a year as this boy is growing up, coming of age, and the story, of course, deals with the after effects of what they saw and how it affected them. This one is recommended for fans of Stephen King for a few different reasons, and I'm going to echo them here. First being the fact, again, it's a coming of age story, which Stephen King is known for doing very well, and so I do think that this one is going to have similar vibes. Unlike with some of the books like It, this one is more centered around one boy rather than a group of boys, so it's much more about him and the effects on his family. But again, this book has great character work. In a lot of ways, it's barely horror. Again, it is more about the characters than the actual incident or what happened to that man in that car. But it's a very compelling story. It gave me all the nostalgic feels for an era of time that admittedly I wasn't even alive for, but it is so well done. It's a really long one, but again, if you are a fan of Stephen King, I assume that length is not an issue when it comes to your books, and I do think that this one has some great moments, some great storytelling, and will again really appeal to those of you that love those character-driven stories that are full of nostalgia and that coming-of-age experience. You will absolutely get that here. And speaking of coming of age experiences, I also want to recommend December Park by Ronald Malfi. And this is a story that follows a group of boys, so this one again more relates to something like It. In this town, there is a serial killer that appears to be picking off the young women. This serial killer is known as the Pied Piper, and this group of boys are deciding to get together and try to solve the mystery of who this killer might be. The one boy that we get most of the story told from his perspective, he has a connection to the police, so we get to see a little bit of the investigation, but really most of the story is really about the boys, their friendship, their awkward coming of age, and like with Boys Life, this one also follows them throughout the years, so you get to see them through the different seasons and how their lives changed, how they grow up, and those experiences. This one really hit home to me, and again, I would say of most of the books on this list, this one is really not horror. It's much more of a mystery, again, the coming of age focus in the story, but I did not mind that. And again, I would say a lot of things that Stephen King is really renowned for writing aren't necessarily horror either. So if you love, again, the boys, the friendship between them, the characters, and again, that experience of growing up and what it means to have your life be changed, to come of age, to lose your innocence, you will have those themes in this book. Again, one that I think is very underhyped, underappreciated, and I would love for everyone to read it, not just fans of Stephen King, but I particularly think that you will all really love this one. And last but definitely not least, I want to talk about Swashbucklers by Dan Hanks. And this is a book that is set in our modern day, but in the prologue of the story, we find out that back in the 1980s, there was this gas leak that caused everyone to hallucinate and possibly see monsters, and people died. And now we are set in the present day where one of the boys, who was a boy at the time in the 80s, is now a grown man and is returning back to his hometown because the deaths have started to occur again. He and his friends are the only ones that believe that there wasn't actually a gas leak. Instead, there was something supernatural going on. And so when the deaths start up again, they are forced to come back, band together, and fight against the evil. Now, from the synopsis, you can probably tell why I'm putting this on the list. And to be fair, I think it's quite obvious that the author took some clear inspiration from books like It in this story, but it's done in a way that is done as a nod and an appreciation to the original work. It's not intended to be a copycat or a ripoff by any means, and it's really this fresh take. Of the books I'm talking about here, I will give the disclaimer that this one technically reads more like Portal fantasy, but it's clear that it is written for fans of horror and coming-of-age stories and those that love that narrative of the young children fighting the evil, especially when the other adults in their lives don't necessarily believe them. Again, this is more like the part 2 of It, or the second part of the story, where the children are now adults and coming back, but again, it's going to have all the nostalgia, the friendship and how it's changed, and it was just a lot of fun. So this one is like horror light. It's the kind of story that you read not to be scared, but because you love horror so much and want stories that are going to be love letters to the genre, and that to me is what this book is. So if that sounds up your alley, highly recommend this one. Again, one that in my opinion is underhyped and I feel like I'm constantly yelling about online, but I'd love more people to check it out themselves. Alright, we've made to the end of the video here. I would love to know, of the books I talked about, which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? I would also love to hear your Stephen King read-alikes, because if I haven't read them yet, I definitely can check them out. Let me know if you'd like me to do a part 2 of this video, because I do think I could find even more recommendations depending on what Stephen King books you're looking for read-alikes for. So maybe let me know if there's a particular Stephen King book that you have been always looking for something that will give you a similar feel, a similar plot, etc. If you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I do read a lot of horror, but like I said, not just Stephen King, but all the authors writing in this amazing genre, as well as thrillers, science fiction, and fantasy. If that sounds good, I hope you stick around. You could help me out by giving this video a thumbs up, sharing it with your friends, and if you hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.